Yo, what is up everybody? Jason here, back at it again with another video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a super simple calculator inspired by the macOS calculator. We are going to make this calculator just with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So no Vue, no React, no UI libraries, no backend, none of that. Not even Bootstrap, okay? Basically no third-party dependencies. For those that are new to coding, I'm basically saying that all you need is a code editor like Visual Studio Code and a browser, preferably Google Chrome, both of which are free. And to make it even more simpler, we are not going to concern ourselves with the orders of operation. Let's go ahead and hop on over to the computer and let's get going. Oh, and lastly, I'm not perfect. This is basically an educational video meant to kind of give you a rough outline and thought process of going into making a web app. So there might be edge cases and bugs that I didn't catch, so hate me now. Okay, last thing for this time, this video tutorial is going to fly by pretty fast. You're going to need to pause this video multiple times. A tip I have for beginners is just get through the tutorial. If you have questions, just write them down and follow up with them after you finish the tutorial. You want to build momentum and get some wins under your belt. It makes sense that you won't understand everything or anything in this video. Just get through it the first time around. Show it off to some people, then come back and go a bit deeper into the concepts you don't understand. Then keep doing this tutorial again and again until you can do it without looking at the solution. Stay tuned to the end of the video where I will offer some insights about coding in general. Okay, the first thing we want to do is design and wireframe what our calculator is going to look like. I know that we already know what the finished product should look like. However, when you wireframe, you get a little bit more intimate and deep with the UI layouts and the app's functionality, and ideas start firing in your head. I'm using draw.io here, but you can literally just use pen and paper. From looking at the wireframe, I see that the UI layout is basically a rectangle consisting of 6 rows, where the first row is just one column that takes up the entire width. The second and last rows have 3 columns, and the third, fourth, and fifth rows all have 4 columns of equal width. So for me, my go-to CSS layout system is Flexbox. Let's go ahead and start with the first small goal. Create the UI layout. Right here, I have the typical HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files in my root directory. Let's create the calculator container element, which is the calculator rectangle box that holds our rows and columns, and we'll give it an ID value of calculator container. I want the calculator container box to be centered on the screen, so let's do some CSS. We're going to create an HTML and body CSS selection, and let's add a nice gray background color, set a flex display, flex direction, height, justify content, and align items to center. Let's create the calculator container CSS selection. Let's do pound calculator container, and just for fun, we're going to give it a background color and a minimum width and a minimum height. Our HTML and body CSS selection will basically center the direct child elements both vertically and horizontally. We can see that here by resizing our browser. For total newbies out there that are wondering how to open their web page in the browser, here is my project folder and files. And you can just right click the index.html file and choose Chrome to open it. Or if you want to be fancy, download a server like HTTP server npm package and start it up in your root directory and visit the port in your browser. Keep in mind that you need Node installed on your computer. Also, keep in mind, whenever you make a change to your code, you have to click refresh in the browser to see the new changes. Let's go ahead and add our rows and columns. Each row element will have a class row, and our first row would also have a class display. The first row only has 1 column, so we only need to add a span element to hold our result display value, which the default value is 0. Our second row is going to have a class row, and we'll add 3 divs for our 3 columns. The first column is our reset button, So we'll give it an ID reset and a class btn, short for button. The next column is the plus minus button, and we'll give it the class btn. And for the third divide button column, we're going to give it the ID divide, and again the class btn. We'll just go ahead and do the rest of the HTML for the rows and columns. Now, modify our calculate container CSS selection and set the display to flex. Set the flex direction to column and our text color to white. We want our row class to have a flex display and a height of 100 pixels. Let's define our display class rule. Set justify content to flex in, font size to 3M, line height to 2.9, pattern right to 10 pixel, and a border. For our btn class, let's give it some pattern, a width, line height, align text, font size, and a border. You should see something like this. Notice that the second and last row have some weird spacing issues. We need to expand our first column of the second row and the last column of our last row to fill up the remaining width of the parent element, which is its row. So let's add a class large to our equal div in our AC reset div. Then let's add the large class CSS and set the flex grow to 1. You should see all the rows even out now. Let's go ahead and color our buttons. Remove the border on our display class and set the background color. Since our number buttons have the color with the most occurrence, let's add a background color to our btn class. We're going to go ahead and add a new class called miss, short for miscellaneous, for the reset, decimal, and positive negative buttons, and set background color to this darker gray. Now, we want to give our operations buttons the same colors, so we'll go ahead and add a new class called operation and set the background color to this orange. Last but not least, we're going to set the background color of the equal button, but instead of giving it a new class, we're going to use the CSS last child selector. Let's go ahead and add our new classes to our HTML elements. Now, our calculator is a little more pretty and wonderful, but of course it doesn't do much but look pretty. At this step, you may still be a little overwhelmed with what to do, which I was as well. So how I like to think about it is, what is the next smallest step? For me, I think the next smallest step is just to attach click event handlers to each button and console log out the button clicked. So let's do that. There's many ways to attach event handlers to elements. You can add event listeners to each element individually, or you can add an on-click attribute to each HTML element, or you can take advantage of something called event propagation. Basically, the DOM bubbles up events from the children elements all the way up to the parent elements. In our case, if we click on a button div, that click event will bubble up to the parent element, which is the row div, and after, it will also bubble up that event to its parent element, which is the calculator container element. So, in order for us to catch this event bubbling, we add a click event listener to the calculator container. Let's go ahead and select the calculator container element using JavaScript and assign it to the variable calc container ella, short for calculator container element. Let's add the event listener and add a function to handle the event. Let's create this function on button click, which accepts the event object. we're going to drill down the event object to get to the inner HTML value and console log it. You should see console logs of what you clicked like so. Alright, so the next smallest step is to create individual functions for each button to handle when it's being clicked. We'll just add a console log inside each function. Let's create a function called doNumber that accepts an argument called num. This will handle our number buttons. Create a function called doOperation that accepts an argument operation. And let's create a function called reset for our reset button, a function called makePosNeg, short for make positive negative, a function called makeDecimal, and a function called doEqual, all of which doesn't need an argument. Now, in our onButton click function, let's assign the event inner HTML value to a variable called btn_clicked_HTML. To handle the number buttons, we want to check that the btn_clicked_HTML value is a number, and if so, call doNumber function. So let's add an if statement, and we'll use the isInteger method from the number API. The argument is going to be an attempted integer casting of the value of btn_clicked value, like so. Next, we're going to create a switch statement on the value of btn_clicked value and handle the cases like so. Checking our browser console, we see that we're good to go. Okay, so the next smallest goal is to just add two numbers together and display the result. We're going to need a couple of global variables. Let's create a variable called cur_operation, short for current operation, to keep track of the current operation. Cur number 1 and cur number 2 to keep track of the numbers. We are also going to need quick access to the display, so let's do a DOM selection on the result display and assign it to the variable result_ela, short for result element. So let's dig into our doNumber function. When a user clicks a number, we want to assign the number to cur number 1 if there is no current operation selected. If there is a current operation or not, each number clicks builds a number as well, so we want to concatenate the current number. So let's declare a variable called newNum, short for new number, then create an if statement that checks whether there is a current operation. If there is a current operation selected, we're going to assign the value of num itself to cur number 2 or the concatenated value of num with cur number 2 like so. Then assign cur number 2 to newNum. In our else block, we're going to repeat the same thing, but for cur number 1. Then outside of our if statement, we're going to assign newNum to our result_ela inner HTML property. Let's move on to our doOperation function. We want to assign the new operation to the current operation variable. However, before that though, if cur number 2 is defined, then that means the user is doing a continuous sequence of operations before hitting the equal sign. For example, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 and so on. So if that's the case, then we want to perform the computation between cur number 1 and cur number 2 and assign that computed value to cur number 1 and reset cur number 2. Let's create an if statement to check if cur number 2 is defined. And if so, let's declare a variable called result. And because we'll be computing for multiple operations later on, we'll call a function compute, which we'll create here in a bit, and pass in our current numbers and operation like so. we're going to assign the result to cur number 1, reset cur number 2 to 0, and finally display the result. For our compute function, we're going to try to cast num1 and num2 to numbers. Then create a variable called result and start the if statement checking for the addition operation. We already know that we're going to call this function for the other operations, so let's go ahead and expand our if statement to accommodate for the other operations. Then return the result. Finally, for our do equal function, create an if statement that checks that cur number 1, cur number 2, and cur operation are defined. If so, assign a computed value to a variable called result. Then display it. Now, when we add two numbers, it should work. Actually, when we do any operations, it should work. If you notice, though we got the basic functionality we want so far, the app feels dull and unresponsive. We can fix this slightly by adding some cosmetic changes. Let's change our cursor to a pointer when we hover over a button. We can achieve that by adding a pseudo CSS selection to our btn class, like so, and changing the cursor property. When an operation is clicked, we want to let the user know which operation button is currently active. So let's add a class active on the same level as our btn class and give it a slightly darker background color. To toggle the active class, let's hop on over to our do operation function and do a query selector to select the target operation element. Now, recall that we set IDs in our operation div's elements. So let's create a map to our ID. Let's create an object called operation symbol map in the global scope where the properties are the operation symbol and the values are the operation div's IDs. We then use this in our query selector like so and assign it to a variable called active operation btn ele, short for active operation btn element. Then we use the classless method on the DOM element object to add our active class. However, what if a user selects an operation but then changes his mind and selects a different operation? If we leave things the way it is, the previously selected operations will all be active. We fix this by removing the previous active element, and in order to do that, we need to create a copy of the previous operation before we assign the incoming operation to the current operation variable. At the top of our do operation function, let's create a variable called prev operation, short for previous operation, and assign it to the current operation. Right before where we add the active class, we're going to add an if statement to check whether prev operation is defined. And if so, select the previous element using the prev operation variable in the operation symbol map and remove the class like so. Now, it's a little bit better since we know the current operation. If you notice, when we click the equal button, the active operation button was not removed. Since we're going to need access to the same current active operation element as we defined in our do operation function, let's go ahead and bring the active operation btn ele variable to the global scope. Then we just remove the active class in our do equal function like so. Now, we should see that the active class is removed when the user clicks the equal button. But clicking on a button still feels kind of dull. So let's add a little flash effect to the button when the user clicks it. To achieve that, let's call a function called flash element at the top of our on button click handler function. The flash element function is going to accept a DOM element argument, so let's pass the event target value in. Let's create the flash element function with one argument Ella, short for element. We want to basically set this background color of the element and use a set timeout to reset it back to its original color. We do that by first making a copy of the element current background color and assign that value to a variable called prevColor, short for previous color. Then let's update our target element background color to white and opacity to 0.5. We then immediately create a set timeout function with a delay of 100 milliseconds, and in the callback, we reset the element background color using our prevColor variable and reset its opacity like so. Quick note, the flash element function is an example of passing a variable by reference as opposed to value. This is because we pass an object to our flash element function, and in JavaScript, when a function argument is an object, it's passed by reference. Now things feel a little bit better. If you play with the calculator currently, you can see that we need to really work on our reset function. Let's keep in mind though, we really have two cases where we're calling the reset function. The first case is when the user directly clicks the reset button, but the other case is when the user clicks the equal button, which is a bit of a soft reset. Let's go ahead and take care of the first reset case. What we really want our reset function to do is just reset every global variable back to null. In the reset function, we'll do just that. Let's check whether active operation Ella is defined. And if so, remove the active class and set it to null. Next, set cur number 1, cur number 2, and cur operation to null. And last, set the inner HTML of our reset element to the string 0. We can see that our reset function works just fine. Now, let's move on to our second case. Let's call our reset function in our doEqual function. Since removal of the active class on the active operation button is taken care of in our reset function, let's remove that here and call reset. When we go to test this out, we see that there's a problem. The reset function overrides our computation result. So what we really want is to modify our reset function a bit to handle the equal button clicked case. When the user clicks equal, we really want to keep the result value displayed, but also assign that to cur number 1 variable so that the user can continue to perform operations on the result. In our doEqual function, let's pass the result into the reset function. Let's go to our reset function and declare an argument called lastComputedNum, short for last computed number. Let's add an if statement to check if lastComputedNum was passed in and is defined. And if so, the equal button must have been clicked, and let's assign lastComputedNum to cur number 1. In our else block, this is the case where the reset button was clicked. So we want to set cur number 1 to null and reset the result display. In both reset cases, cur number 2 and cur operation should be set to null. Voila! Click and reset, and resetting when the user clicks the equal button works just as expected. So I want to show an easy way to show the current state of our global variables to help us debug easier instead of doing a bunch of console logs. Go to our index.html file, and after the calculator container element, add a div with some pattern, and inside this div, add a div for each of our global variables like so. Then in our JavaScript file, create a debug function that basically just updates each of those divs with the current value of our global variables like so. Then call this debug function in our onButtonClick function after the doNumber function is called and at the very end after the switch statement. As you can see, we can literally see the updated states of our global variables. We're pretty close to being done. Next, we need to work on the positive-negative function. In our makePosNeg function, it only makes sense for us to do anything if there's a current number. So let's do an if statement to check if either current number 1 or current number 2 is defined. If current number 2 is active, then the user must be trying to turn current number 2 into a positive or negative number. Else, they're trying to change current number 1. We then want that result to be displayed. So, within our if statement, declare a new variable new number. Then, create an if statement to check if current number 2 is defined. And if so, multiply current number 2 by -1 and assign that value to new number. Also, set current number 2 to new number. In our else block, do the same thing but for cur number 1. Outside the if else block, update the display with the new number. You should see the positive-negative button working. However, what happens when we do something like -9 plus 9? Then click equal, and then add 9 and click equal again. You can see that things are a little wonky since we still have the active operation highlighted and the global states are not right. Try to pause the video and hunt down the bug yourself. The issue is in our reset function when we check if last computed num is truly. When we did -9 plus 9, the result was 0. So last computed num in this case would be 0. And in JavaScript, this conditional check would result in falsy. The easy fix to this is to check if last computed num is not equal to undefined. Also, let's put that same fix for our doEqual function as well. Things should be all gravy now. And last but not least, let's finish by working on our decimal functionality. In our makeDecimal function, we need to check whether we are adding a decimal to current number 1 or current number 2. So, create an if statement to check if current operation is defined. And if so, we must be on current number 2. Check if current number 2 is defined by using a ternary operator. If current number 2 is defined, this new variable, nstr, short for the number string, will be set to the string casted value of current number 2, or else the string 0. Now, we only want to append our decimal if a decimal doesn't already exist. So check if the string has a decimal in it already. If not, we append the decimal to our num string. Outside the if block, update our display in current number 2 with nstr. And for our else block, do the same but for current number 1. As you can see, we have some repeated codes. So let's create a function called appendDecimal right within makeDecimal that takes an argument n. We'll copy and paste the ternary line in the if statement and swap out the current number variable for n. Then we'll return nstr. This is an example of a closure. This may not be the best usage of it, but I just wanted to show you that you can write functions within functions in JavaScript. Then we clean up the rest of our code like so. All right, so there you have it, a little nifty calculator. Yay! I wanted to end this video with some, conclusional remarks and insights. 1, coding can be pretty messy and very overwhelming, especially in the beginning of a project. So what really pulled us through in this project from, idea, conception, all the way up to, execution is the next smallest step mindset. The art of software development is really about breaking big goals into smaller goals. 2, notice that we didn't spend all day, trying to come up with functions that are super reusable or, super, DRY, do not repeat yourself, and computer science proper. We just started coding things after we designed, and we even had repeat codes in the beginning. Yes, reusability and the do not repeat yourself principle are core tenets of good software engineering, right? But however, in the beginning, you never want to focus on optimization, right? You want to just hurry up and ship it. You want to almost kind of worry about it as it comes, and almost like when you're cleaning up your code. Premature optimization is a no-no. I see people spend days and weeks wasting so much time on issues that sometimes end up being non-issues. Again, you have to focus on building momentum. Our focus in this tutorial was to get something up and running, up and clicking as soon as possible, and then we took steps back along the way and revised as we went along. We realized that we had repeated code, so we encapsulated all that repeated chunk of code into a new function, right? And use that where it's appropriate. You have to focus on shipping the code first, then clean up and optimize later on. This is how software development is done in the real world. You think Facebook looked the way it is, when Mark Zuckerberg created it in his dorm room? You want momentum because you want to sustain your interest, or else you'll just get bored and abandon the project. 3, coding is very much like writing. When you write an essay, a good essay takes drafts and drafts and many more drafts and many more edits, sometimes by yourself, sometimes by peers. The same thing for coding. Your first couple of lines of code probably won't exist, when the finished product is shipped. Your code will be removed, improved upon. Don't take your code too personal. Code is meant to be changed. Matter of fact, you can probably think of better ways to make this calculator app. Anyways, if you felt like you got a lot of value from this video, please like and subscribe. It does me wonders because it helps me to know that I'm doing something good, and I'll probably make more tutorials. Share with a friend, that's probably trying to learn how to code. Other than that, keep doing this tutorial over and over. I keep stressing it over and over until you can do it without looking, right? Remember, it's just an outline, kind of like a guide to start you off on your coding journey. Peace.